Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leylands, ask the Leylands. Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leyland brothers. Whatever it is that you want to see, ask the Leylands, ask the Leylands. No matter whatever that happens to be, ask the Leyland brothers. Come on, me in and join in the fun, travel all over Australia. Ask the Leyland, ask the Leyland, ask the Leyland brothers.
This week we've had some more interesting requests for Ask the Leyland Brothers. First we go to Cairns to meet an Aboriginal potter called Thankupi.
And then we go to Tasmania to have a look at a number of rather interesting historical places. Historical Tasmania lives up to its name. And then we travel across to Mount Gambier here in South Australia to have a look at the famous Blue Lakes, among other things.
We've come to the Australian Heritage Gallery in Cairns to meet one of Australia's leading potters, Thankupi. Thankupi's work is unique because she uses symbols from her own tribal legends in her pottery. This story was suggested not by one letter, but by many letters, from both adults and children. Many people have asked to see Aboriginal artists working in both traditional and non-traditional forms. The Australian Heritage Gallery in Cairns has on display the varied art forms of the Aboriginal people from all over Australia. This gallery, like its counterparts around Australia, is designed to develop an awareness and understanding, both in Australia and overseas, of the culture and art of the Australian Aboriginal race. From the traditional to the modern, like this work by the celebrated artist and author Dick Ruffsey or Gooper Thalden. Gloria Fletcher, who works under her tribal name of Thankupi, is recognised as one of Australia's leading potters.
Make sure we don't have any air bubbles. One other way of wetting.
The National Gallery in Canberra recently purchased a 2 by 3 metre ceramic mural from Gloria called Creation. She was invited and attended the World Craft Council's tour of Mexico. Thankupi, the wattle flower, was born at Weipa on Cape York Peninsula, where she grew up and learnt the legends and stories of her people. Today, Gloria draws on these memories for the designs and motives on her pottery. When Gloria moved to Cairns, she became interested in pottery and decided to make it her career. In 1970, she studied pottery under Peter Rushforth, head of ceramics at East Sydney Tech. Since completing the 3-year course, she has exhibited in 7 major exhibitions around Australia, including one-man shows in Sydney, Canberra and Cairns, where she teaches pottery to school-aged pupils at her workshop at the Heritage Gallery.
And what I'm doing now is just rubbing oxide so that I have dark and light shades. You can do them when they are leather hard or when they are dry.
Gloria's works reflect her thoughts and memories of her heritage.
I remember because I sat down on my grandfather's knee and would listen to story around the fireside.
She uses the legends and stories her grandfather told her to decorate her pots.
This is a legend of the fishermen, Tungan, Kandrai, Hanj, Andral. story about them. One day building great big sand hills outside of Weipa. Just in case you want to know what that is, I'm just putting in the sea. Dots indicate Earth. I find it very interesting, and that is what I really, wanted to do when I first went to East Sydney Tech. And I find now that I can make it part, even if it's just, part of a non-cultural thing, by putting, the motives, which I feel is something to do with, Australia. One of the main interests is to also, be able to reach people.
The pots she has been working on for the past few months are destined for an exhibition in Sydney. Thankupi is giving pottery a real Australian identity.
Miss Gwen Coxhead from Blakehurst in New South Wales writes, "Some years ago I was in Tasmania and was most impressed with its historical links with Australia's colonisation." She then asks to see some of the historical parts of Tasmania on Ask the Leyland Brothers. So to answer her request, we start our story at Richmond, only 24 kilometres from the city of Hobart. Around 1807, Hobart town was suffering a severe famine. The wheat crop had failed in New South Wales and supply ships were having difficulty getting through from England. As a result, the settlers had to go out and hunt their own food. They were hunting emus and kangaroos. And by doing so, they opened up new country. This region here, the Richmond area, is one of those areas that they opened up. Settlers came along to the Coal River, and because it was suitable for growing wheat, they cultivated the banks and started up their own crop. It was so successful that it later provided food for the whole of the colonisation of Australia. It was known as the Granary of Australia. And because of its early start, Richmond contains buildings and other structures which go back to the very early days. One of those is the bridge here. Built in 1823, this stone bridge represents the oldest stone bridge built in Australia, which is still standing. The bridge was constructed with convict labour and meant that coaches could pass without delay between Hobart and the east coast, and later to the Port Arthur penal settlement. The town grew rapidly, and in the 1830s was the largest town in Tasmania. There's a legend that the ghost of one of the convict overseers, who was beaten to death and thrown off the bridge by the prisoners for his torturous treatment of them, still haunts the bridge. This all adds colour for the visitors, but the local tourist authorities hardly need such stories to attract people. Not only does Richmond include the oldest bridge in Australia, but also the oldest Catholic church. St John's Roman Catholic Church was opened in December 1837 and includes in its grounds the grave of a 4-month-old son of an Irish political exile transported to Tasmania for rebellious activities. Wherever one turns in Tasmania, reminders of the convict days are not far away. Probably the most visited of them all are the ruins of the Port Arthur settlement. Here, the most beautiful building erected is this church. Although only a shell now, it's possible to see what a grand construction it was. It was begun in 1834 and took 2 years to complete. It was never consecrated because it was used by several denominations. It certainly occupies the most impressive and picturesque site in Port Arthur. The 4-storey penitentiary was originally a granary and later converted to a prison as the demands for more room at Port Arthur increased. Probably the best preserved building at the old convict settlement are those of the Tower Guardhouse. Built in 1835, the stone lookout post stood directly above cells which were used for convicts awaiting transportation to Hobart for execution. Although trials were held at Port Arthur, no executions were ever carried out here. Most famous of all Tasmania's tourist attractions, at least those that fall into the category of being connected with the convict days or stone buildings, whichever way you like to look at it. Of course, the convicts that came here were the more hardened type of criminal, the ones that had committed a second offence since they'd come to the colony, and had had a pretty ferocious reputation, although conditions here weren't all that bad. Some of those criminals were rehabilitated, and they became quite useful citizens in the community. One such man, a stonemason, literally carved for himself quite a reputation in a bridge at Ross. Today, the bridge attracts a lot of visitors, situated as it is about halfway between Hobart and Launceston by road, although it's no longer on the highway. Daniel Herbert completed the remarkable carving work on the stone bridge by himself and earned himself a pardon for his efforts. The bridge was a long time in construction, and it's believed that a good deal of the rock from the local quarry, which was intended for the bridge, ended up instead in the more prominent buildings of the town. Daniel Herbert liked the Ross district and settled here once free, and now is buried in the old town graveyard. His grave is marked with a stone he carved himself. Ross's old world charm and appealing character lies in its streets of Georgian architecture. Outside the town hall is a stone step used to assist ladies alighting from coaches, as this was a coaching stopover on the journey between Hobart and Launceston. The old coach house is now a restaurant serving Devonshire teas to visitors. Not all buildings of historical interest are connected with the convict days. The Methodist Church, one of the most impressive structures in Ross, was built in 1885. At Hadspen, not far from Launceston, we're reminded of the part which free settlers played in the development of Tasmania. This grand old house has been beautifully preserved as an example of the way of life of the well-off settlers. Entally House was constructed in 1820. Most of the historical links with Australia's colonisation had their beginnings in Hobart, for in the old days it was the only port of entry into Van Diemen's Land. It's well known to most Australians these days as the finishing point for one of the annual sailing classics of the world, the Sydney to Hobart yacht race. These waters have seen sailing ships of all kinds, from modern sloops to the earliest square riggers of the past. Well, since those old square riggers sailed into this harbour with their human cargo, Hobart town has certainly grown into a thriving city. It could be said that many of the settlers which came to this new land were gamblers, gambling that here they would find for themselves a new kind of life. And I suppose you could say they were lucky gamblers too, because it paid off. Of course, the convicts had no say in where they were going. They weren't gamblers. Today, Hobart town is still famous for gamblers, because here at the famous Rest Point Casino, we have the only place in Australia where gambling is legalised. And that comes after more than 150 years of illegal gambling of a different kind. On the 3rd of December 1800, Captain Grant in the Lady Nelson, just off the coast here, sighted this mountain along with a few others in the district, and he named this one Gambier. And that's of course how Mount Gambier got its name. But Mount Gambier today doesn't mean so much the mountain to most people in Australia, it means the town of Mount Gambier, which is about 18,000 population. It's just below us, down below this mountain. We've come to Mount Gambier to take a look at Mount Gambier and its history in answer to this request from Miss Mandy J. Hoare from Parkenham in Victoria, who asks to see Mount Gambier and to relate its history. Well, firstly, regarding its history, this tower behind me here was constructed in 1900 to commemorate the 100 years since Mount Gambier was discovered. Although it was discovered in 1800, it was about 40 years before a white man was to stand on this spot and gaze down upon the beauty of the lakes below. These lakes all lie in craters, and all of those craters are part of a volcano which blew its top about 5,000 years ago. These lakes in the craters of an extinct volcano are probably the city's biggest tourist attraction. The natural beauty of the lakes and surrounding countryside is best viewed from the Centenary Tower, erected on the summit of Mount Gambier, 190 metres above sea level. The picturesque lake system so close to the city not only provides an excellent natural recreational area for the people of Mount Gambier and its visitors, but also supports an abundant waterfowl population. These two beautiful lakes, which are in this crater valley, are known as Valley Lake, and this lake behind me is known as Browns Lake. There is no doubt that the first white man to see these lakes, in fact the whole lake system here at Mount Gambier, was Stephen Henty. He came here in 1839 looking for a place to settle with his cattle. And in 1840 he sent a group of men here. They built a hut somewhere between these two lakes on this strip of land where I'm standing. And they also built a stockyard for their 400 head of cattle. The stockyard was built down there where the lake now is. At that stage, of course, it was dry and since filled and submerged the stockyards completely. Stephen Henty stayed here for about 5 years and managed to graze his cattle in this area. And there is no doubt that what he saw when he first came here, this lake and the other lake, and especially the blue lake of Mount Gambier, was a most impressive sight. The magnificent blue lake is the most famous of the crater lakes. This remarkable lake mysteriously changes colour every year around November, from its natural grey to this rich blue. It changes almost overnight, and just as mysteriously changes back to grey again in March. Since 1883, the waters of the Blue Lake have been pumped out to provide the town water supply. Today, a modern pumping station driven by electric motors operates automatically, drawing up to 20 million litres daily from the crater without affecting the level of the lake. The lake level is fairly constant, although it has been known to change slightly, so the pumping units are mounted on pontoons. The water from the lake is good quality for an underground supply, with fairly high levels of magnesium and calcium salts. Oddly, the lake does not support life. No fish live in its waters, and even algae will not grow in the Blue Lake. Although now, of course, it could be said to support life in the sense that it provides the town's water supply. Many visitors believe the lake to be bottomless, but in fact its average depth is 73 metres, although at one spot there is a deep hole which plummets to 205 metres. There have been many theories as to why the lake changes colour annually. However, so far no one has provided a satisfactory explanation, and as long as the mystery remains unsolved, this can only add to the attraction of the Blue Lake for the thousands of visitors who make the trip each summer to see the richness of the famous Blue Lake for themselves. The city of Mount Gambier, built on the slopes of the extinct volcano, lies in the heart of rich volcanic soils and is the principal centre for the surrounding agricultural industries. It also lies midway between Adelaide and Melbourne and is a natural halfway stop for travellers making the journey by road. No stopover in Mount Gambier is complete without a look at the beautiful cave gardens right in the middle of the business centre. A spiral footpath descends the flower-festooned walls of the limestone sinkhole to a depth of about 25 metres. This cave gardens, as they're known, come as quite a pleasant surprise in the heart of Mount Gambier. This hole here, this cave, was originally full of water, or fairly full of water, and it was known as a source of water to the Aborigines originally, and way back when Mount Gambier was first established, provided the town's water supply. the Henties knew about it, and they built a hut not only down in the Valley Lake, which we saw earlier, but they built a hut here, quite near to the water. The cave these days, though, doesn't provide water for the town. It dried up some time ago. It these days provides a drainage hole instead, and all the stormwater from the streets here runs into this cave. It appears to just keep going in there, and nobody quite knows where it ends up. Who knows, perhaps after filtering through the rock, the water could end up in the Blue Lake. The district of Mount Gambier is also well known for its limestone, or Mount Gambier stone as it is more commonly referred to. About 11 kilometres west of the city are large open-cut quarries where the almost pure calcium carbonate is cut into convenient building blocks. This creamy white stone is easy to cut, it's light, strong, and has good insulating qualities, and it's been used as a building material for over 100 years. It was formed millions of years ago when this area was under the ocean and was created by the efforts of tiny coralline creatures working on the seabed, lacing together this calcified mass. In earlier times it was quarried with cross-cut saws, but mechanised methods came into use after World War II. The deposit of coralline limestone lies in a straight line for 7 kilometres and varies in depth from 2 to 6 metres. It's been popular as a building material ever since the settlers discovered it, and many of Mount Gambier's homes and prominent buildings, like the hospital, are constructed from Mount Gambier stone. There is no doubt, though, that the magnificent blue lake of Mount Gambier's extinct volcano is the district's most famous asset. Its bewildering blueness never ceases to fascinate those that see it.
Travel all over the countryside, ask the Leylands, travel all over the countryside, ask the Leyland brothers. Whatever it is that you want to see, ask the Leylands, no matter whatever that happens to be, ask the Leyland brothers.